All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about one of the most important and honestly one of the most controversial books in all of political philosophy. It's a work born out of absolute chaos that has shaped our world in ways you might not even realize. We're talking about Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan.
So what's the one big question at the heart of it all? This one right here. Are we, at our core, selfish? Hobbes' answer was a resounding, unapologetic yes. He believed that deep down, we're all driven by a desire for power and a deep, nagging fear of death. And that simple, kind of unsettling idea, it's the key that unlocks everything else in his masterpiece.
But, to really get why Hobbes was so obsessed with order and control, you have to try and see the world he was living in. This wasn't just some theory he cooked up in a quiet library. This was a response to a world that was literally falling apart at the seams.
I mean, just look at this timeline. Hobbes drops Leviathan in 1651. That's only 2 years after the English did the unthinkable. They publicly executed their own king. For nearly a decade, his country had ripped itself in two. It was chaos. It was a failed state. This first-hand experience of civil war, that's the terrifying backdrop for everything he's about to argue.
So seeing all this bloodshed, Hobbes asks a fundamental question. What is life actually like without a powerful government to keep us all in check? And his answer is one of the most famous and chilling ideas in all of philosophy, the state of nature.
Now, it's really important to understand that the state of nature isn't some actual time in history. It's a thought experiment. It's a what if. What if there were no laws, no police, no authority whatsoever? Hobbes says that because we all have a right to everything in that scenario, and because we're all more or less equal in our ability to harm each other, we live in a state of constant, miserable fear. The only logical move is to strike first before you get struck.
And this grim logic leads him to his absolutely unforgettable description of what life is like in that state. It's a war of every man against every man. And he doesn't just mean constant fighting, but the constant threat of it. In a world like that, why would anyone build anything, create anything, or learn anything? The only thing you can really count on is the fear of a violent death.
To really let this sink in, let's just try it ourselves for a second.
Seriously, just picture it. You wake up tomorrow and every single police officer has vanished.
And then you realize it's not just the police. All the laws are gone. There are no rules, no consequences for anything, no one to call if things go wrong.
So, what would you do? Your first instinct is probably to lock your doors, right? But then what about food? What about water? What if your neighbor, who's just as scared as you are, decides that their best chance of survival is to take your supplies before you take theirs? See, even if you're a good person, you're forced to act like you're not. That is the ruthless trap of the state of nature.
Okay, so if the state of nature is a complete nightmare, how in the world do we escape it? Well, Hobbes says we use the two things we all have, fear and reason. Our fear of death gives us the motivation, and our reason shows us the exit. And that exit is a contract. Now, to build this contract, Hobbes makes a really key distinction. He separates a right, which he calls jus, from a law, which he calls lex. Think of it like this. A right is the freedom to do something. In the state of nature, you have the right to do anything. A law, on the other hand, is an obligation that stops you from doing something. To get peace, you have to be willing to trade away some of that absolute freedom for some rules. The logic just kind of flows from there. We all fear a violent death, so our reason tells us, hey, we should probably seek peace. The only way to get that peace is if every single one of us agrees to give up our right to everything. But here's the catch. Just promising isn't good enough. We have to actually transfer that right to one single powerful authority who can force everyone to keep their word. This mutual agreement, this trade-off, is what Hobbes calls the covenant.
So what does this covenant actually create? What is this common power that we all agree to submit to? Well, this is where we finally meet the Leviathan.
For Hobbes, the state isn't some natural thing. It's an artificial man. It's something that we, the people, build ourselves. We stitch it together out of our collective agreement to create something much, much bigger and stronger than any one of us. And its only job is to protect us. He even calls it a mortal god. A god because on earth it holds the power of life and death. But mortal because, if it fails, it can die and send everyone spiraling back into civil war.
And he really runs with this analogy. The sovereign power, that's the soul that gives the whole thing life. The judges and officials, they're the joints that let it move. The laws are its reason and will. A healthy, unified society is good health. Rebellion and dissent are a sickness. And civil war, well, that's just death. the death of the artificial man.
Now, for this whole thing to work, and this is the part that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, Hobbes argues that the Leviathan's power has to be absolute, undivided. The sovereign makes all the laws, judges all the fights, controls the army, and even decides what ideas are too dangerous to be taught. Why? Because any division of power creates factions, and factions lead straight back to civil war. And since the people created the sovereign, they can't rebel against it. That would be like getting mad at someone for doing the exact thing you authorized them to do.
So as you can imagine, Leviathan landed like a bombshell. It was instantly controversial, and it became massively influential. It really set the stage for all of modern politics by arguing that a government's power comes from the people, not from God. But then it used that very modern idea to justify an all-powerful state.
So much of the political philosophy that came after was basically a direct response to Hobbes. You can see it perfectly when you compare him to John Locke. For Hobbes, who lived through a civil war, the absolute worst thing was chaos. Security was everything. But for Locke, who was more worried about powerful kings, the worst thing was tyranny. Liberty was the priority. Hobbes says you give up your rights to be safe. Locke says some rights can never be given up. That tension, security versus liberty, is still the fundamental argument at the heart of our politics today.
And that leaves us with the same tough question that Hobbes put on the table centuries ago. It's a question for every single one of us. Where do you draw that line? How much of your personal freedom are you willing to give up in exchange for being perfectly safe? Is there a point where the price of security is just too high? Or is the threat of chaos so bad that any price for order is worth paying? There's really no easy answer, is there?
This is for entertainment and educational purposes only.